Problem is people who abuse their powers and use fiat money to create total chaos and mayhem and corruption. I have to tip my hat to Michael Saylor because he always brings up ethics and morals, and in terms of all the shit coins and what they represent. Raoul Powell. And, he's a guy that was really loose with ethics and morals and the law. Yeah. And Michael Saylor just took him to task and just ripped him a new asshole. FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried is really a microcosm of the American story for the past 45 years. He took a fraudulent token, the FTT, and he used it as collateral to spin up layer after layer after layer of cross-collateralized, recollateralized, rehypothecated layer cake of holographic proportions of nonsense, and then it collapsed. Everybody is complaining, and it's an outlet to complain. It's a reflex to complain. I think that in the old days, you had to have some restraints, because, you were far away. Let's say you had to complain about the spaghetti you had the night before. It took you 5 miles away from the house and to complain. By the time you got there, you forgot about it. But here, you're on your phone. You're like, God, that spaghetti last night, I hated it. I'm going to complain right now. And you're complaining. There's no restraint between you and the complaint. So you end up, in a constant state of duress. Where's the love? Where's the joy? Where's the happiness? But, it brings up a lot of things. That government, a Bastiat quote, you talk about his essay, life, liberty, and property are the things that government is there to ensure or to protect or to help guide. Okay, so there is a role for government. I'm not an anarcho-capitalist that says no government is just anarcho-capitalism. I think that there is a role for governance because governance is threaded throughout our lives. Bitcoin protocol is governed by the protocol. There's a governance model. Governance models are not the problem. The problem is people who abuse their powers and use fiat money to create total chaos and mayhem and corruption. And what he's saying very simply is we've got a governance here that's pretty straightforward, and we are a country that has money enough to do the things that we guarantee for our citizens, life, liberty, and property. And one of the things we're doing to ensure life, liberty, and property is to get rid of the gangs, right? The gangs who, by the way, were exported for the most part, from Los Angeles prisons. So the money is there, if you don't steal it, right? If you don't steal the money, there's plenty of money there. There's a society here. They're governed. They pay taxes. The government's got a kitty with a lot of money in it, and they're using that money to invest in the country, which encourages entrepreneurialism, which freed up $6 billion that was being extorted by the gangs. It's now in the economy, which has a knock-on effect. So everybody's got a 20% increase, like a tax raise. Now you've got the diaspora coming back. They estimate 500,000 Salvadoran diaspora coming back to this country, which is another huge GDP boost. And you just add it on and on. All you need to do is not steal. Just don't steal. Yep. It is the end game of a Ponzi scheme. So the COVID lockdown triggered a massive layer on top of the Ponzi scheme. The Ponzi scheme works because you have to keep printing more money to pay off the investors who were early in the Ponzi scheme.
Yes.
And so when you hit the COVID crisis and there was a slowdown in international trade and you had a potential slowdown in the economy, that would have triggered a collapse of the Ponzi scheme. You remember Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme collapsed because in 2008 there was a massive drawdown in the stock market, and it revealed the fact that he was a Ponzi operator. He was a fraudster that had been going on for a long, long time. So in the COVID crisis, there was a drawdown, there was a slowdown, which was revealing like the tide going out. Suddenly, as Warren Buffett would say, everyone's naked. And, oh my God, there's a Ponzi. So to respond to that, they had to engage in such a massive quantitative easing, like money printing bacchanalia of multi-trillion dollar, that you had that money supply, 40%, money supply increased 40% in a year, right? I think that's the most shocking increase ever, probably in history of any country ever, in the sheer numbers of it. And the results are complete malinvestment, as Bukele points out, there's plenty of money if you don't steal. Well, when they did that massive bailout during the COVID, there was a massive fraud, massive stealing. The PPP loan program was a massive fraudulent program. And you and I were watching all this unfold. And yes, it resulted in, now we have this incipient inflation problem, and it's just rolling on top of each other. The whole journey of America is one of hard work and prudence and probity.
Proof of work.
Proof of work.
Now it's proof of stake.
Now it's just proof of stake. And that transition to proof of stake is now resulted in the country, the entire country now looks like Madonna. There's so many fillers, so much facelifts, so many manipulations. I mean, this is what America now. Madonna is the face of America, because there's no accountability. There's no grounding to reality. It's like, we can keep getting facelifts forever, and let's not look in the mirror, and let's pretend that this is not a grotesque deformation of the material girl from the 1980s. FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried is really a microcosm of the American story for the past 45 years. He took a fraudulent token, the FTT, and he used it as collateral to spin up layer after layer after layer of cross-collateralized, recollateralized, rehypothecated layer cake of holographic proportions of nonsense, and then it collapsed. When I started on Wall Street, I believe the entire debt of the country was like $1 trillion.
Yeah.
Now here we are 45 years later, and the interest on that debt is $1 trillion. And so the millennials and the Gen Z and the up and coming generations are experiencing complete future shock that the inflation is real because of all that money printing and borrowing. The economies are been exported abroad to create derivatives to reward people in the instant. The baby boomers, of which I am, took all that cash at the expense of all these other generations. Yeah. And so Paul Krugman would still say that debt doesn't matter, and we should just ignore the debt. And of course, everyone in Washington, D.C., and you talked about the State of the Union address, they still believe that this is just I believe, I only saw like 6 seconds of it, but I believe they were banging the table on infrastructure again. And of course, they're going to be like, let's go into debt by $5 or $10 or $20 trillion more to do infrastructure. And of course, get that interest payment on the debt to $2 or $3 trillion. And that's called currency collapse. And that's where we're at in the cycle. The baby boomers consumed 50, 60, 100 years worth of consumption in 10 or 20 years.
Yes.
And the people that came after us are now, dealing with higher inflation. They can't afford stuff. They can't afford housing. They can't afford rent. They can't afford food because we stole it all. It was stolen. And to get back to the Bukele quote, there's money enough if you don't steal. So don't steal. Like, that's a basic lesson. It's in every spiritual text, every religious text, every communal text, every form of governance that's ever existed for 100,000 years. One of the basic principles is don't steal. But somehow in 2023 in the United States, that is still a foreign concept. Stealing is legal. People go to the CVS, the drugstore, and just steal stuff. And there's looting, wholesale looting. And they walk out the door and they're like, well, I'm stealing because stealing is the way. I have to tip my hat to Michael Saylor, because he always brings up ethics and morals, and in terms of all the shit coins and what they represent. He was on with Raoul Paul, I think, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Raoul Paul. And, he's a guy that was really loose with ethics and morals and the law. Yeah. And Michael Saylor just took him to task and just ripped him a new asshole live on his podcast. And he had nothing to say about it. And because he's on the right side of history, he's right. It is unethical and immoral to engage in shitcoinery. And Bitcoin is not that case at all. It's completely righteous. They don't want people saving money because they don't want people to have individual sovereignty. They don't want people to have economic well-being. They don't want people to be outside of being entirely reliant on the state, right? So CBDC will be heavily monitored and tracked, of course, by the state. And it'll also be like a frequent flyer mile that if you don't spend it within a certain amount of time, it expires, because they don't want people to have any savings whatsoever, because that would give them independence of thought, and politically they don't want that.
It's also, like I said, through this whole timeline, they decided that reward is great, risk is bad. So let's just separate risk and put it over there. the fact that we know in the future, if we do, build this economy, that the economy is going to be 10 times the size as it is today. Well, that's not fair. Like, why should we build the economy and those people in the future get to enjoy that economy? Let's spend that money now, because we're doing the work now. Let's spend it. Like this sort of notion that you could just ban what you don't want. So the bank run fears, we fear a bank run, so we're going to ban a bank run. We're just going to ban it. Like you can't lose faith in us. That's what they're saying. You're not allowed to lose faith in us. Like, you must have faith in us, which is like totalitarianism, right? That's authoritarianism, to say you must have faith in us.
Yeah, it is authoritarianism. It is totalitarianism. That's what CBDCs are all about. That's what Britain is all about. And every time Britain comes out with a statement like, we really want to be the crypto, quote unquote, Bitcoin center of Europe and the world, I've been saying for years now that that's a false statement. That'll never happen in Britain. They're always about massively controlling the population from the state down. It's one of the most statist countries in the world, highly, highly regulated. It's not a place of free speech whatsoever, or many other freedoms. That's a misnomer. And so here you have the CBDC, which, as you point out, is basically saying to the population that we don't want you to be in a position where you have the ability to politically take action against us in any kind of independent way. We want you to be entirely dependent on our money printing, the CBDC, which is a surveillance technology. Plus, it'll be like we've mentioned this before, the credit score, the Chinese credit score, social credit score. If you're not completely in sync with what the government wants you to do, your credit score goes down, and you lose, let's say, access to buy flights on planes. Your passport expires and things like that. So it is totalitarianism, without a question. And it's not surprising that a country like Britain would be all for totalitarianism. That this is the mindset of this country now, really set for 1,000 years. It's never been different there.